Hello and welcome to the LongView Real Estate Podcast. In this episode, I'm talking with LongView Real Estate Executive Chair Evan Thornley about the agency's Airbnb management strategies and how investors could increase their returns by potentially up to 40%. I wonder if you could just walk us through step by step what LongView's philosophies are around Airbnb.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, the first thing to say is there's a very good reason for some investors to get into Airbnb. And I think the most important question is to work out which investors and which properties it makes sense to go into Airbnb or short-term furnished and which ones it doesn't. So we think there's only a small proportion of properties that probably make sense to go into Airbnb. About 5% of all the properties in Melbourne will be better in Airbnb and make much more money. But if you happen to own one of those 5%, you could make a lot more money. And look, I took one for the team here. I tested this myself.
Market research is nothing like it.
This is real live market research with real money, I can tell you, mate. So, I bought a small block of 4 Art Deco flats in St Kilda, which I thought would be prime Airbnb territory. And they were in what I'll call traditional rent.
Yep.
And we moved it over to Airbnb and had to learn a few things. But within a year, I was getting about 40% more cash in the bank each year than I was through traditional rent. And, that's a lot. That's a huge difference. Now, again, that's not for everybody and that won't be the case for every property. We're talking a real game changer in terms of the outcome for the investor.
Tell me the difference between, what is the right property, first of all, and second to that is I've got a 2-bed flat, which I think is suitable for Airbnb, and I've got a 4-bed house somewhere for Airbnb. Let's break it down a little bit.
Most of us sort of assume that, Airbnbs are all a bunch of small apartments in the inner city. And there certainly are plenty of small apartments in the inner city in Airbnb, but unfortunately, most of those owners are not making more money than they would have in traditional rent, partly because there's a lot of small apartments in the city on Airbnb. So we actually have a very particular point of view about the best properties to go into Airbnb, and it's exactly not perhaps what most people think. In the right locations, houses, townhouses, and then whole small blocks of apartments is where we think the big opportunity is and the big value is for the investor. And I'll explain why. There's a segment of travellers who use Airbnb that I'll call family and group travellers. Whole family travelling together, 2 families travelling together, group of people coming down for a wedding, a corporate group that are here for a project for 3 months, and there's 10 of them. There's a whole, many of us have been group and family travellers over the years. There's very few places you can stay that give you all the benefits of an Airbnb. I'll give you an example again from the market I know best, the St Kilda market. The amount of money you get per bedroom in a 4-bedroom house in St Kilda in Airbnb is about twice as much as you get per bedroom for a 2-bedroom apartment in St Kilda. So put another way, you'll make about 4 times as much money in the house, even though it's only got twice as many bedrooms.
And in layman's terms, the reason is?
Because there's a lot more family and group travellers who want to stay in an Airbnb than there are Airbnbs available for those large groups.
Right.
So demand is greater than supply, price goes way up. And so the people that we find have the most attractive opportunity are often the people who'd never thought of putting their property on Airbnb. And often they're also people that I'd call accidental landlords. So they're often people who've either inherited a property, the old family home, or perhaps it was the family home and they've upgraded or they've moved somewhere else, but they've been fortunate enough to be able to keep this as an investment.
What's the process? Do you have to sign up for 12 months with LongView to be an Airbnb client?
Well, I think that the challenge for one of us is somebody's going to have to furnish that property.
Yeah.
Whether you furnish it or we furnish it for you. And if it's not going to be an Airbnb for at least 3 years, whoever's bought that furniture is going to have wasted a fair bit of their money. Yeah. So we do suggest to people that if we look at this, it's something you'd want to do for the medium term, and it needs to be a property where you're reasonably confident you're going to, you want to hold it for, say, 3 years. Then, in most cases, actually what we're doing is we're furnishing the property for the client, so they don't have to outlay the cash, and then we just take the cost of paying off that furniture out of the total rent that's received. I know people are worried about, well, what if my property gets damaged, with all these guests moving in and out. Well, here's the interesting thing, right? Every time a guest moves out, which is usually every 4 or 5 days on average, we bring the cleaners into the property and the cleaners do a full inventory of every piece of furniture and everything that's in the property and any damage done to the property and videotape the whole thing.
Right.
Whereas in traditional rental, your property gets inspected every 6 months. When we're managing it in short-term furnished, it's getting inspected once or twice a week.
You hooked me on data because you mentioned data, and I know LongView, you have your data specialists and your researchers there. How much of an important role does that play in terms of the feedback you can get to potential clients and, you know, the research that you do on their behalf.
As someone who's come from, funnily enough, Silicon Valley and the data and tech world into property now, which has been my life for the last 4 or 5 years, property's not about property. Property's about family, finance and data.
Yep.
And so we spend all of our time with clients actually helping them as a family decide what's best for their family.
Yep.
Helping them understand what their options are about the way they finance their properties, which can make as big an impact on the result of your investment as the property itself. We don't do the finance, but we just make sure people understand their options and they can go and get professional financial advice on how to execute that. And then, the weird thing about property is most real estate agents tell story after story, but they won't give you any facts. Let me tell you, I had a client once who did this, and it's like, well, that's interesting, but what about the people who didn't?
I think that's the artwork of the salesman, isn't it?
It's all narrative and no numbers.
Yeah.
That would be okay if the numbers weren't so big that it would be pretty important to get them right, and if there wasn't so much data out there so you can get it right. Coming from outside the industry, I've never seen an industry where there's so much available high quality information about when a property was sold, how much for, when it was rented, how much it was rented for, how often it was vacant, what other properties are like. There's all of this information out there, so it doesn't need to be guesswork, right? You just need to get the available information that's in the marketplace and be able to analyse that information to give clients very accurate advice about exactly what's happening in the market, exactly what value there is in their property and how to do that. All we've done, from my point of view as an old Silicon Valley guy, is get all the existing information and analysed it and been able to package it up so that we can give our clients an accurate understanding of what's happening with their property and in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So it's not about stories, it's not about guesswork, and it's not about flim-flam. It's just about facts.